Hello, my friends. How are you? I'll get John on here in a second. People were asking about the Discord server. It's basically ready. Hendrik and Iggy have been helping set it up, and I think we're going to send invites tomorrow, maybe even tonight. I got to put a few things up, and then I think on Thursday, I'm finishing productions here at the house all day, so I think I'll just be on Discord all day. So we're going to do invites probably tonight or tomorrow, and then Thursday be up on Discord, having that going. Yeah, what's up, Iggy? Yeah, shout out to the homies helping out, helping make that happen. How you guys doing today? Grab John in a second. There he is. Waiting for him. Yo.
What's up?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing good.
Yeah?
Yeah, had a nice weekend away. Back in the mix.
Back on the mix, back in the mix.
In the mix, on it. How you doing?
Good. I've had my buddy Bobby here at the house the last few days, just writing, making tunes, and we work on a late schedule. It's actually funny. One of the questions was, and we can jump right into it. Who asked the question?
What up, Spider?
What up, Spider? Oh, Spider in the house. Will asked, what are your working hours? How do you decide what's enough? And I usually have a pretty standard schedule, but because I'm in writer-producer mode, I'm adapting a lot for artist schedules. So I'm usually like, wake up in the late morning, no alarm, do some things for a few hours, and then start work in kind of the one range.
Yeah.
And then just work until I'm done. I mean, if I'm doing particular things, I'll end earlier than other times. But like with Bobby, we were just starting late. We wouldn't start until 5 or 6 in the evening, even though he's staying at the house. Like we just sort of hang out, get up late. And like last night we worked till 5 a.m. So I'm a it
sounds like it. I can hear it in your voice.
But it was a blast. Like, those are the hours.
Yeah.
And we made something inspiring at inspiring at like 2 a.m. So,
yeah,
sometimes depending on what your role is in this profession, or even if it's not a profession yet for you, figuring out what your rhythms are is important. Figuring out the rhythms of your collaborators is also important. You keep pretty regular hours.
I'm like, just in the past couple of years, I'm super interested in 10 to 6. And then if I have to do more later, like last night, I had to do notes up until 10 p.m. And I was watching Birdman with my girlfriend. She hadn't seen it. And I was just like pausing it, going to do a quick shift on a snare kick, whatever. I'm around for those those same night deadline things that have to be done. But 10 to 6 is a solid 10 hours. Like that's a long time.
Yeah.
But not working straight through, just being available at that time. And then if I have to be available after dinner, I'm down if I have to, but I prefer not to be.
Yeah, I think the arc of most people's career is you're going to have to be on, probably any profession, you're going to be on other people's schedule and other people's time for a long time. And then you'll start to get enough quote unquote success or recognition or whatever, or power in the relationship, so to speak, where you can dictate. And I think almost everybody that I know realizes later than it's actually happened. Like it turns out as you go in your career, you can dictate more things than you think because you're so used to being it's a thing I see with artists a lot too, where, a lot of artists spend the first X amount of their career trying to get recognition and trying to get people to like them. And then at a certain part, if you're an artist and you sign to a label and all of a sudden you're making your record, you become the boss. And you better use everybody else's tools. And that flip from I'm trying to get everybody's attention and I'm trying to hustle and get people to recognize me to I need to act like the person who's the authority figure is a weird transition. And it happens in our profession too. I mean, at this point, you are, as we talk about, you want to ultimately get hired for your taste, and you're getting hired for the thing that Jon Castelli knows how to do. And what that means is that they're looking for you to dictate things. And if what you say is, here's the hours I work, people will go, great, we're hiring you, we'll adjust to you. So and like I said, for me, I'm most of the time doing that, but also if I'm with an artist or a writer or somebody and they work starting at midnight and I want to work on that, I'll just make the adjustment because that's where it is.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear what y'all cooking up over there. It sounds fun.
Yeah, when I'll actually, I'm going to bounce some things in the next couple of days. I'll send you a couple of things. They're actually really dope. This is sort of a tragic topic, but Sophie, the great artist, just passed. And so we were listening to a bunch of Sophie records and getting inspired and making some stuff that sort of in that emotional vein, but nothing can touch what she was doing. Like just unbelievable stuff, and a really tragic thing. So sending lots of love out to the PC Music folks and Sophie's friends and family.
It's really devastating, honestly.
Really crazy.
Not to linger on it too much. It's just like wow, that's a very human thing to realize that, anything really can happen to you at any point in your life. And there's, it makes you question your mortality for sure. This thing is finite. This thing that we're doing, this living that we're doing. So puts things into perspective for sure. And those of you that don't know about Sophie, go listen to her stuff. Like there's amazing productions, amazing stuff as an artist. Just go listen to Lemonade.
Lemonade. I've listened to that like 3 times.
Exactly. Yesterday. Just start there. Wow.
Doing things sonically that no one else has done before or since. So really interesting stuff, especially for people. There's some questions this week. I don't know if we'll get into about sound design or whatever, but the ultimate sound designer. I mean, people look at folks like Sonny, like Skrillex and folks like that, but Sophie was at the top of the game too.
Absolutely.
We got a bunch of.
Yeah. What do you think? Well, what are we doing today? What are we talking about?
We got a lot of interesting questions. One actually from my buddy Jack, which I thought would be a cool topic, and then I realized maybe it's a whole episode.
Okay.
And it's his question was, what does it mean when someone asks you to make a chorus sound big?
Great.
Which is a great topic, but I wonder if maybe we should do a whole hour about like notes and communication, and maybe we can have debates about what does it mean for something. If somebody goes, well, I want it heavier, bigger, louder, I feel like that's a topic that screws a lot of people up because they don't know what it means.
It's funny. I was about to bring up today. I was on a walk this morning, and my thought was like, what can we talk about today? We don't have any specific subject matter. I wanted to lean into the term jargon with you for a second.
Okay.
And this kind of fits that a little bit. Like, we both do, but I'm right now reading a bunch of science books, and I listen to scientific podcasts and different people, and you hear them use the term jargon. It's like, all right, well, for the people that don't understand scientific jargon, what do you actually mean when you say top-down processing, bottom-up processing? Like, what do these terms mean? And what does this mean in music too? What's our jargon? Like, we talk about compression and dynamics and these tools and these tricks and things like that, but that's just jargon. And I wanted to riff with you on this idea. Like, as an engineer, I talk a lot about speaking like an artist, and talking to the artist and making them feel comfortable being weird and talking in colors and shapes and sizes and all the more general, kind of more, what's the word? I guess it's just more philosophical about what someone's going for, a vision versus like super, jargony. That's the best word to describe it. So I'm just wondering how you feel about that. And this kind of sits in there too. It's like, well, what does it mean bigger? I think bigger would mean smaller, meaning less pieces to the puzzle would make it feel bigger. So when you're saying raise the synth, I'm thinking, wait, do we sink the vocal into it a little bit more and make it more expansive? Like, what do we mean bigger? Is the vocal not thick enough? Does the vocal need to be bigger? Like, our brain is supposed to digest and understand these concepts, these notes, and spit it out the other end without being too jargony. I don't want to maybe the vocal needs to be more compressed or more saturated. It's like, well, those words are here in Live with Matt Rad and to understand what the tools that we have are, but that's not how you communicate. And I think, like, looking at comments in our thread and people in the DMs that are talking to us, a lot of those words are used, and I understand that in a understanding and a growth into your position and your role in the room and understanding your profession. But that's not how you actually need to speak to understand a concept of what you just said. What does it mean to make a chorus bigger?
So my thought, I have two main thoughts, and one of them is the words we use, and the second is the role that we play. And the first thing about the words we use, with the exception of louder and quieter, and maybe a few others, almost every word we use for music is appropriated from another sense. So something is heavy is not something that has to do with music. It has to do with a physical thing, or something that hits hard. Hard is a physical thing. Yeah. Heavy is weight. Something being bright is light. We've appropriated it for sound, but basically, you want something soft. You want something.
Well, it makes
heavy.
your eyes open. When something's bright, it makes you go, whoa.
Yeah. So there's overlaps for sure. It's not some random thing that we're pulling, but I think it's important for people to understand that we don't have great words for all the sonic things that we want to do, because so much of what we do is a subjective response from a listener. And so they're using words like words about the real world, words about the literal world, the tactile world, to describe an emotion. If something feels heavy,
but there are actual objective ways to elicit those physical responses.
Well, so here's the second part, which is, though, all I'm saying is that we all use those words, and they're all imprecise, and they all mean similar things, but can potentially unique things to different people. And the second thing with our role is basically to interpret people's notes.
Yes.
And so when somebody says something like, "Can you make the chorus heavier?" the experienced record maker will go, "Okay, what is the intent of this song? What's the feeling that's happening? Do I need to add something to it? Do I need to turn something up? Do I need to reduce something before it?" My favorite example from my youth is "Smells Like Teen Spirit." That chorus feels huge because the verse and the pre, in addition to all these other things, but because the verse and the pre are so small. That's just
the verses are mono, I think, mostly.
And then they just have maximum Andy Wallace in your face guitars in the chorus. But if you played A-B, the chorus of that versus the chorus of some rock song from the last couple of years, that rock song might sound sonically more aggressive or something in the moment, but it doesn't have the dynamics, and that's what makes it feel heavy. So when somebody says, like you said, if you get a note from an A&R saying, "I want it to feel bigger," or "I want it to feel whatever, I need a lift here," that's one that A&R uses a lot. So what does that mean, a lift? Okay, that usually means where we're at, we need some extra development. So I think development. I don't think raising frequencies.
No,
I think arrangement development. But sometimes it's
harmonic development.
Harmonic
in a lot of ways. When someone says they want to lift, it's like, well, where's that tension coming from? Like, where's the release coming from? Like, these are bigger conversations than like, oh, boost high end on the synth. I guess that's what I mean by the jargon conversations. Like, there's so many words.
Yeah, and Dreamcatcher Studio asked a great question here. How many sounds can the human brain interpret simultaneously without diverting attention? So John, I think there's some studies on 3, and I think it's the important thing to think about is adding more things may not solve your problem of making something bigger. And so again,
it's the opposite most of the time.
Yeah, oftentimes it's reducing something else, because also so much of what we do, and especially the last 2 conversations we had about loudness, is when you or I deliver something, there's something at maximum volume. We've maxed out the volume to our aesthetic and sonic desires. So maybe it's not as limited LUFS wise or whatever, but we've made a maximum. There's something that's at the peak,
and then there's a peak at 0. Yeah.
So if somebody wants something else to be louder, oftentimes that's going to change the gain relationship. So all of a sudden you maybe need to duck things and readjust. So the point being that the idea of jargon and notes is always frustrating until you realize that if it's always frustrating, you just need to get used to it, and that's the way it is. So when I get notes, everybody gives notes as non-musicians and because there just aren't good words for it. So even if an A&R goes, and I think it's somebody, who was I talking to recently, who was asking about, they were talking about mixed notes. I was talking to a friend of mine who's running a record company, who's just started a record company, and he was asking how to talk to the mixer, and he was like, "Do I say something about like compression? I want to use technical things." And I was like, No. A good mixer, their job is to take the emotional thing that you say to them and translate into technical stuff. So if you say, as someone who doesn't know exactly what they're talking about, and even if you do, if you say, "I want this exact EQ move in this space," the person who's actually doing the mixing might have a better solution for the problem. If you go, "Okay, I want this part to speak," maybe there's some, like I actually just did this note with one of the projects I'm working on, where I got a mix back. It's a great mix. And I said, there's a lead guitar part in the post that I want to feature more. Maybe it's level, maybe it's adding some low mid to compete with the vocal, but I want it to feel more like a lead instrument. So I gave a couple of my I'm a technical mixer guy suggestions, but said, here's what I'm after. Make it work with whatever you're doing.
Yeah, so I just want the latter. I just want the later part.
Yep, exactly. And so I was probably annoying about it, but he'll find the best solution for it. And that's a thing that I think it frustrates people always, because it's the classic thing of like, isn't there what's the shitty A&R? There's jokes about A&Rs and managers and people giving notes that don't make any sense, but it's our job to interpret them.
Sure.
Anyway, those are my thoughts about that. I see some questions there, but I want to get to some questions that people. Okay, here's an interesting one. Mm-hmm. Matthew asked, "How important is mixing on flat monitoring?"
There's no such thing as flat monitoring.
So go.
Well, the room is interacting. There's no such thing as a flat monitor in a room. Once there's a room, which you can't hear without a room, there's always going to be some sort of space. It's how important.
Well, so I think the question really is like, and I've had this
Rory, speak up here. How important is mixing on flat monitors? No such thing. There's never going to be. So it's not really is there a better way to phrase that question?
Well, so here's the question. I think the question is a version of the question, a topic that we've talked about, which is how important is great monitoring? Because I think also people misunderstand.
The most important.
So people misunderstand flat monitoring and great monitoring. So flat monitoring, you can have speakers that are, forget the term flat. And we're gonna have the Unfucked Studio guys on here to chat at one point, and they're both on here in the chat. So look at
so complicated.
It is very complicated. I don't want to
answer this question.
Well, I think it's an important conceptual thing, and maybe we'll move on to it and we'll talk more in depth with Spider and Rory who are in the chat there.
Yeah.
But a lot of monitors get tested in anechoic chambers and have a readout for their frequency response, and the more expensive they get, the closer they are to being flat compared to like $200 monitors or $400 monitors. But speakers are made to be used in a room, and oftentimes the deficiencies in people's monitoring setup is more about the room than the actual monitors, although the difference between $500 KRKs and $8,000 PMCs is going to be significant. But there's a lot of
they'll energize the room differently, and they'll get different types of feedback from the room.
Yeah, so I think the thing you want to avoid, especially in kind of basic monitoring setups, if you can't construct rooms yourself, you basically want to avoid missing frequencies or resonating frequencies. So in terms of something being flat, you don't want to be missing stuff or have everything to be all askew. But it's really hard to achieve that. And good speakers and people who know what they're doing, setting up in a good room, that's really the only way to achieve that. But the reason it's important to have accurate, why don't we say instead of flat, accurate monitors. The reason to have accurate monitors is you don't miss things.
Also, let's hit Zach's question, because this is really relevant. Cheap monitors in a good room or good monitors in a bad room? Neither. It's a marriage of the two.
Yes, exactly.
It's the way that they interact. You can't pick one of those versus the other, and the other against the other. That doesn't hold up. There's
many scenarios where both of those could be good and both of those could be bad.
There's really just no answer to this question.
Oh, it isn't a thing, because a room is how good a room is sonically. You're right. I take back what I said. How good a room is sonically is based on the relationship with the speakers and the listeners. Yeah.
So it's tricky.
But certainly, just conceptually, if you're making records, you don't want to not hear things that you're trying to make. You don't want to not hear frequencies or things like that when you're listening to what you're doing.
Yeah.
The more accurate, the better.
Yeah. I want more descriptive words. Let's go back to notes for a second.
Yeah.
More descriptive, feeling, emotional word choices that, again, elicit an emotional response. What did Roy say? This is Matt's party. We'll be on soon. Can't wait.
Yeah,
and I think that's more important than even bringing the monitoring in. Like, if you don't have a way to get one of those feelings from your monitoring setup, like if there's no feeling from it, that's something that I would consider more highly than everything that was just asked, talking about rooms, speakers. Like, do you get an emotional connection to music via headphones? Then put on headphones and make your notes there. Do you use AirPods? Do you like your iPhone? Like, let's get the room out of the equation when we're talking about giving mix notes or production notes or notes that determine the feeling of a record, a visual aesthetic to the record too. Like, am I actually hearing what I'm feeling and seeing? Like, when I see the music video for this that isn't yet made, if I had a budget, I'd make it. Like, these are more overarching things. Yeah, I know we're talking to geeky engineers who want a good room, or producers who want a good room and speakers, but it's staying kind of on topic, which again, back to the communication and jargon. It's like, well, how do you connect to music? How have you in the past connected? That's going to be your reference point. So find one of those to finish records. And that's, we've talked a lot about monitoring. We've talked a lot about, I'd love to maybe keep today a little bit more on like the finishing and how to communicate in the room and connecting to the record. And yes, that matters when it comes to your room speaker marriage. But if you don't have that, everyone has a reference they understand.
Yep.
Is it your car? Like, let's focus on that today and stay present in that moment.
I really like. Yeah, I really like to hear you. I like that you said that, and it's important for people to hear that. I think oftentimes we get into such technical discussions about monitoring and the importance of monitors, and we're talking about things that are in a high price range or out of people's price range in a lot of ways. But the reality is, fundamentally, you have to have a setup that you love making things on. Yeah. Somebody actually asked about Jake asked about the 10,000 hours rule. And the way there's a lot of things about the 10,000 hours that make sense, but the one thing they miss in it is you have to really be enjoying the process when you're putting in many hours. And whether it's 10,000 or whatever, that it's sort of a headline number that can't possibly be real for everybody in every way. But the idea of getting mastery of something is really about enjoying the process of pursuing it. I mean, it may be true that if you had a private tutor teaching you violin for 5 hours a day for 15 years, that you could get the same thing. But there's no private tutors. Nobody's putting us in producer lessons. I mean, there's school, and some people do some of that. But even that, it's a few years. Like, if you want to be great at this thing, you have to have a setup you enjoy listening to, and then you just got to do it a lot. And people, I don't want people to think that when we're talking about having precision monitoring setups that are accurate and expensive and hiring people, those things are really important for the music professional ultimately to get it the way you want. But you got to have just joy in your setup. It's got to feel good to you. And understand the intention for the type of record and where it's going to be played, right? I have an example. So last night I had to add drums to a record that's already out, doing really well. It's got no drums in the record as is, and the song is doing well enough that they want to put it to radio. So they added drums just for the radio version, and I'm mixing in the drums, and I got them hitting, and there's a lot of low end, and the producer, homie Blake. What song is out there that has no drums, that's done very well? I'm going to talk about it. It's great.
It's called "Without You" by the Kid Laroi.
Yeah. So you're doing a drum version. That's awesome.
A drum version for rhythmic radio. And he's like, this is not going on Spotify. This is only for the radio. So let's treat it as such, right? Like, maybe, so it's going to be listened to in the car, right? Like, where else do people listen to the radio? It's probably going to be 95% listened to in the car. Yeah. So check this shit in your car. Does it have too much low end and not enough high end to the kick? It's supposed to be a live, like John Bonham style kick drum. Like, I want to hear it in the room. I did a slammed on Fairchild, right, to get some of that like room sustain, and I did compress or limit or whatever y'all want to call it, and saturate and bring tone out. Like, is that translating to the car, or was it too subby because I like low end in my kick? He's just like, but he's painting that picture. Like, this is where it's going. Fuck your PMCs, fuck your great speakers. This is going to be in a car. Now, granted, I can make those decisions to understand how it's going to translate in the car on my great monitoring, but that's not the point. The point is, how is it going to sound elsewhere? Understand the point of all of this. And that actually, like, it hit home with me. I was like, right, I'm going to bounce this and go to the car. Like, I rarely do that or really care about that, because I don't believe that we mix for radio. I believe we mix and then things go to radio, and radio has their own compression algorithms that want to make it sound like it's on the radio. And I'm mixing for streaming most of the time, because streaming doesn't really dictate radio. Radio doesn't dictate streaming. They're in their own lanes, and most songs that are successful are not even on the radio, like, so that's not really the reason to mix for the radio, quote unquote, but mix for the car and understand that and translation. But I always love when a producer, or when I say it to myself, it's like, this is what this is for. Yeah. It takes a lot of the guesswork out. It's actually really sick. The version with the drums is pretty sick.
That's awesome. Anyway. I can't wait to hear it. I think, that's and we got into it a lot last week at the end of the loudness discussion. It's funny to get older and realize that all of the philosophical stuff is the most important. You can learn all of the tricks for how to make the snare drum brighter, but why do you do it, and in what scenario do you do it, and how does it connect to the intention of the record, the emotion of the vocal, how much that snare drum transient hits on this record that you're doing is a function of what the vision for the record is. Yes. And so those of us that have learned a bunch of different tricks, and there's still more tricks to learn, and how to make a snare drum, for example, bright, but really it's about when and how do you do that, and why do you do that. And this is a perfect example of it. Yeah,
let's keep going on this. This is another cool part of this too. Is he's like, yo, first pass sounds sick. Like, the kick's wrong. You put my like sampled hip hop kick louder and punchier. I wanted that more live, kind of roomy Bonham Zeppelin thing. And I was like, oh, that's tight. I mean, I got that, but I also wanted it to hit like a hip hop record. He's like, yeah. Like, I get that, but like, let's take that punchy kick down and turn up the live kick. I was like, sick, but that's like a clear vision for what the producer wants. And you got to try one or the other way and see, but there's intention and there's communication. And that's what makes a record successful and the process fun to do. We're on FaceTime and on a live stream and just having fun, trying different balances of the kick. And that's just fun, right? Yep. And then if you're injecting fun into the process, that's going to translate into the final product in a lot of ways too, right? Like, people can feel that we had a good time making that record. I hope so. I think it translates that way because it doesn't sound overthought. The drums are bombastic, but they're controlled. It's like, it's a pop record, but it's raw, and the bass is live, and it's not perfect, and all that stuff is in there. It's just the right balance of both of them, and that's understanding intention. That's not having the tricks. That's not understanding how a limiter works to put on your bass. Like, fuck that.
Yeah. And Zach asked a great question, but one has to learn the non-philosophical stuff first, surely. And I think the answer is no. You can learn them at the same time.
Yeah,
and actually, you will move quicker by understanding. You're learning about EQ for the first time, and what does it sound like? What's the difference between 3K and 5K, and how does that affect a snare drum? How does that affect a vocal? Those things are really important to understand, but also you got to understand why and what's the reason.
I think that's first. I think it's the backwards. I think we're taught the other way around, or we think we're supposed to know the other way around. I wish that I understood intention before I understood how to make a snare crack.
By the way, I would actually say, I'll take back my statement a little bit and say, before you learn anything technical, you're only existing on the intention and philosophical stuff. So we're just talking about the analysis of the thing that you already do in your interaction with music. It's just keeping that throughout the process. You got to continue to be a listener, and continue to be a listener and a fan as you go through this process. It's very easy to get bogged down in technical stuff, and then you're listening to how other people are doing their shit and what new thing comes out, and you forget that thing of, oh, I'm just a fan of music and now I'm making it. And even for me, who's been doing it now like 25 years, like since I was like 10 or 11, like I'm still. Like, again, R.I.P. Sophie. I just geeked out on those Sophie records a few years ago. Every 6 months, like, there's just sounds in there that are so exciting. Like, I'm a fan of music first. And, when we listened to some of the Sophie stuff, just started playing with synths and I'm not trying to make a Sophie, but just like it was inspiring because I'm a fan of music first. And all I want to do is continue to chase the feeling that I had when I was young, not to try to make the most technically satisfactory whatever. And yes, along the way, you start to learn about the technical stuff, but you got to keep the philosophical stuff we talk about is just like a professional or analytical reflection of being a music fan. You have to be a music fan. You have to love your, again, we talk about crazy modern, but you got to love your setup. You got to enjoy the room that you're in. You got to enjoy the process. You got to enjoy this thing if you're going to make good stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I'm all hyped right now.
No, I mean, I could talk about another really specific thing. This isn't something I've done, but my homie Ethan Schneiderman, young writer, producer, engineer, 20 years old, kind of mentoring a bit from afar, checking in and just love what he's doing. And every time we chat, he tries to get me to like a mix by I think his favorite mix engineer, Sean Everett, and I love Sean Everett, and I think Sean Everett's like probably the most dangerous mixer we have right now.
What are some of the things he's done, just so people can
Alabama Shakes, but for the current Casey Musgraves, half of that big record that came out last year, a lot of things.
Cool.
Might have done the most recent Cold War Kids record, I think, that people were into. That does a lot of like alternative sounding things, but also did, like you said, did Casey Musgraves. And he's got this really dense, kind of saturated, loud, compressed mix style, but that is also musical, right? Lucius record too. I love Lucius, friends with the girls too. And exactly. So Cameron brings up Good Days by SZA. That's why I'm bringing this up. And Ethan's like, I think you're going to like this one finally. And I'm like, no, I don't like it. The War on Drugs, sorry, that was the record I was going to say. Yeah, the Good Days record to me doesn't sound good. It sounds like a miss. It sounds like a missed opportunity to connect deep in a three-dimensional sense, where the sounds are so ambient and euphoric and psychedelic, and everything is pushed up against the glass and everything is loud, or you can't connect with that third or even fourth dimension. Thinking of the song Across Time, I talk a lot about try to talk a lot about the fourth dimension, which is a temporal approach to mixing, like from start to finish and blocked out 4-bar music. But I think that Sean's work is, again, so dangerous. It's like something really, there's like something almost there, but because of the vintage warmer or like some sort of saturator that he might use on his mix bus, it sounds a bit flat. So when I got this Kid Leroy drum session in the rough, that was the feeling to me. It felt two-dimensional, flat, but had really good energy. It's like, well, how do I reach into that record, and how do I pull out kind of the right amount of things to open that back wall up? And I just, the SZA thing is like, it's so dense, and I'm wondering how we can go about not thinking that that's good and thinking there's something good in there that needs to be teased out a bit more in a genre like that, in a record with the sound design of that style, and something that's not maybe only top 40 and supposed to be loud, which still I argue that you could do all of this, but it's really heavy-handed, and hip-hop fans are not ready. Yeah, it's the vocal has so much 1.2, 1K, that mid-range, it's like all in the reverb and tunnely, and I don't want to, sorry, I'm not trying to trash the mix. I think it's almost fucking fantastic. Yeah. But it's missing this kind of, this care and this deeper dive into why. Because I understand why these sounds were created, and I don't know why the final mix sounds like it does. I understand the sound design nature and the psychedelia of it all, and this kind of kaleidoscope effect of things. And I don't know why it doesn't feel three-dimensional when it can.
Yeah, I've only listened to the song a couple times. I haven't really dug into it. I think I may have even just kind of heard it on my phone. But there was an interesting question that somebody asked that kind of goes into this a little bit. Sandra asked about really wet mixes, stuff like The Weeknd seems like watching a magic trick, or reverb tips. And what I was thinking about that today, that I think about, and I didn't do this up.
Well, what Weeknd record?
Well, yeah, that's true.
Modern Weeknd records are not that wet, and if they are, it's only vocal.
Yeah, well, so that's a thing, and I think and again we get back to talking about records and talking about notes and talking about, there's oftentimes when I get a note about reverb or delay on a track, it's not at all what's happening. I think it's a confusing topic or a confusing sonic thing for people to wrap their heads around. And my current thinking, which is going to evolve, and hopefully you jump in on this, that I'm now trying to treat reverb and delay, which I didn't do before. Maybe it's sort of obvious to say, I treat them as another like standalone mix element. I've gotten a few things, but it's interesting because I've never thought of them that way, because I always think of them as returning because I don't see the waveform. So conceptually, I don't, for a long time, my brain didn't go, okay, this reverb might need some dynamic adjustments or multi-band EQ or need some filtering in certain spots. Like, I didn't think of it as its own sound. I certainly did things like automated for a certain note or automate in different sections. But the idea of there's an actual waveform. Yeah. And I mean, please speak on that a little bit. I feel like that's the thing. And one other thing really quickly is that when you're adding something in the mix process, or you're adding something like reverb, oftentimes you're so focused in that it's hard to get a perspective of making a whole record feel wetter. Initially, it just feels wrong when you start to add a whole bunch of stuff that has never had it before. So sometimes just getting perspective on that in other ways is really important, listening in different contexts. But I think exactly that. Like, people go, here's a really wet record, and the reality is it's just a big reverb that stays out of the way, but it's big. And then the productions, like the weekend stuff that feels really wet, like you said, is often just the vocal is wet. And then there's not a lot of other density in the record. So there's not like doubled guitars or big keyboards. It's like drums and a low pad, and then lots of reverb around the vocal. So it feels like there's more than there actually is. I don't know.
I have so many.
Think about that,
yeah, so many things. I think about every effect as its own channel.
Yeah,
it's. I mean, I don't remember the last time I had a verb without an EQ or a saturator or something on it. It's part of sound design, right? If you're going to put it there, it needs to serve a purpose. I don't really do like the subtle delays and reverbs very much. It's either like dry or is it a vibe? Personally, I don't just like add an eighth note delay just because I hear someone did it. For example, like to give space to the vocal. There's other ways to give space to the vocal. Chorus effects and shorter verbs, brighter verbs, darker verbs. When you say words like that, brighter or darker, you're talking about equalization, filtering, and tone shaping, right? So I'm constantly shaping. I mean, some of the best producers that I work with commit all their effects, and like there might be a verb on one waveform and one note, and it's clearly filtered and automated, and it's its own thing, right? Like I do delay throws without a send and a return. I duplicate the track and I put effects, distortions, I put everything on the track, so then I can commit that and cut it. So like it ends on beat 4 before the next hook or something, like it's very specific and designed. It's not like a and then just let it go into the ether, So I think about effects as important to everything else, and I don't just throw things on. So that being said, one of my reasons for bringing this mix up, the Good Days mix, is that the reverb has so much of the same frequencies that the vocal has in it, right? So it just builds up and builds up, and when you're that loud, saturated, and compressed and limited, there's no distinction between the dry and the wet. It's impossible because you're just so up against the glass. So when I hear that vocal, and I would suggest that people go back and listen to this, you'll hear that the mid-range of the vocal is in the verb. And if the mid-range of the vocal was cut out in the verb, then the vocal would be clear and present, and there would just be this glow around it. It's a simple move. That's why I'm wondering why that wasn't done and where was the intention there. Because it just sounds like a miss. It just sounds too dense in that area, and these are easy things to change. So that's why I'm kind of want to talk about it to the people that are coming up and trying to make these moves. I think, this is interesting. Talking about Billie Eilish, all the effects on her vocals are so deliberate and so shaped and EQ'd, so the vocal just stays there. Like you never lose her. You never lose that ASMR effect that she has, Well,
and somebody said on there, this is a really interesting one. They said it's crazy how many takes someone like Billie Eilish will do to make perfection. But I would argue that they are, my impression, I don't know if this has changed, but they're not doing comping and tuning after the fact. So they're actually trying to perform and this is what one of the many things that makes her music so compelling. It's performed as perfect as possible in order to get the sound that people are used to of perfect time and perfect tune, but it doesn't have that nudging and effect on it. So it adds this richness whenever a single vocal, doubled vocals, hugely layered vocals, they have a realness to them that would be softened and phased by auto-tune and lining things up by hand.
Yes.
And maybe they do some of that, maybe there's chopping, but my impression is that they spend all that time getting a real performance to happen. So the perfection is not edited perfection, it's performed perfection, which makes for a very different character.
Very different. But we're talking, you know, when talking about space, the space is equally as important for these. Like we talked a couple of weeks ago about, I was obsessed, I've been obsessed with the Phoebe Bridgers album, and so many of those records, those automated verb throws, like those verbs are treated, they're EQ'd, and I bet they're bounced, and because they come in and they're out. Maybe, I mean, you can mute, automate. These are other ways to do these things, but seeing it, like you're talking about the waveform, seeing it visually is a big part. Especially in the production aspect. As a producer, you should commit these things and cut them. Like I love working with an artist and producer named Jeremy Zucker. He's so good at sculpting his verb and delay automations in the specific space that they take up, and he sends them in the waveform. It just cuts on that snare and just like so dynamic and emotional. And he's one of the best at it, in my opinion. Ari Lauv is really good at these things, like these super pop moves that are just so dramatic, and then you just cut. You know, those. It would be hard to do that if you weren't seeing the waveform and kind of riding it up. I mean, I'll mute returns and things like that, but it's so much easier to see the waveform. And these are sound, like this is why it's important for those of us that make records, whatever you're doing, to learn things like what is sound design, try to make something, even if you're a mixer, understanding what it takes to how Skrillex makes a snare drum where he's compressing, he's distorting, he's putting a reverb, he's rendering it, he's some of those concepts can be applied in very simple ways, but very powerful ways to what, say, you're doing, where it's, okay, I'm going to print the reverb, then I see it visually, then I can do a fade in for this thing and cut hard on this snare. And they're simple things, but they'll make those moments pop even more. Yes, and also these shaping reverbs, like that, when I'm talking about that mid-range build up on that record, and then if you took it out of these are subtle moves, right? Yeah. This is like notching out these little bits of the dry. What I'm talking about, because I feel like I'm bashing the sound of some records. Like I'm a super fan of Sean, and I think that like when it's nailed, it's nailed, and there's nothing like it. But I'm hearing these very subtle improvements that I just want to come off a little bit more compassionate when in my tone. I don't think it's like, I think it's make or break in a lot of ways. With things that I want people to understand why I'm even bringing it up and what the purpose of me bringing it up is. Like, these are things that you should consider, the relationship between the dry and the wet. That's how you get space. That's how you get size. I can talk about the fact that I just, for the first time on Thursday, I went over to Dale Becker's place last week and I mixed my first song in Atmos. And
what is Atmos? What
Atmos, Dolby Atmos surround.
Oh, okay.
The full surround. Spider can correct. I think it's 21 speakers in total, like 4 subs, maybe 17 speakers between the ceiling and LCR, sides, ceiling, back, rear. It's just it's what movies are mixed on, right? And I was in the mix, like physically. Yeah. I had this concept of trying to mix talk in Atmos. And the lead synth is in 3 layers. So it's a sine wave, and then it's a buzzy sawtooth, and on every end of 4 bars is a twinkly, super high octave layer that comes in. So I visualized this before going over to the studio, and I wanted the warm, thick, dense synth up front. I put the sawtooth in the middle speakers, and the buzzy high one, twinkly, in the back speakers, and up high, right? You can fuck with height and space in a really three-dimensional way.
Where it comes from. Yes. Which speakers it comes from. Interesting.
Yeah, they're called objects, and you place the object not even in a speaker, in a place in a room. There's a renderer, and you can see the panner is a room. It's a box. It's a sphere. Not a sphere. It's a cube. And you place these things wherever you want. And there's a size knob, and the size visually, just like you see the dot, and it starts opening the dot up, and it adds ambience around it. So this is easy to do in Atmos because it's just a knob. But in stereo, what we're doing with space and these effects is creating that sense of size. That you can't have size without a space, right? You can't judge size without a space. So if a DI Michael Jackson guitar is not in a room, it just sounds like it's right in the speaker and like this, really small. And the minute you put a slap delay or small room verb or record it with an amp in a room with a mic somewhere else 30 feet away, you get that size. In Atmos, it's unbelievable. Anyway, we could talk about Atmos for another whole episode because I'm going to try to dive deep in it. That's a conversation happening at the moment. Might try to put an Atmos studio at the gift shop. But the size is something that we're trying to get. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about EQing and sound designing and shaping the space. It's equally as important to the dry signal, and it should be treated as such. And I think there's a lot of missed opportunities there. And I'm wondering if it's a lack of education. Like I've never, watching Tony mix, he always treated the effects. Like I've never seen him lazily just throw a reverb on. And if it's a lazy throw the reverb on, that template verb has already been shaped into something that he knows works on the lowest common denominator record, right? Like, so that work has been done before. So anyway. Yeah,
I think I'm trying to think of the reason why it's undereducation, because like I said, I haven't thought of them as waveforms. Like once you turn a reverb or a delay into a stereo waveform on your screen, my relationship with just changes, because maybe it's coming from learning
from console mixing.
Exactly, console. So everything's returned. So there's a physical box that all the reverb's being sent to.
I mean, we've talked about this. I only have 5 template returns that are in my template, and I barely ever use them because it's always sound designed according to the song, like 98% of the time. But they're there. If I want a Berkowski style chamber reverb, I love the Sunset Chamber. I have it to hear, but I might do it differently. I might put it on just to hear, and then anyway, what were you gonna say? Sorry.
So you when you're deciding to put a reverb or a delay on a vocal, you'll just copy the track, put a plugin on it at 100%. Find the sound, find the balance, then render it if you use it, and then from there do your edits and things.
Or no, not necessarily. Or if it's a reverb, I will send to it, but I'm going to. All right, let's just take a step back.
Yeah.
I will use a return, but I will sculpt it as if I'm seeing the waveform, right? So my brain is working as a producer and seeing the waveform. But I will do that, and then yes, I might render it if it's a super effecty one. But if it's a verb that's going on the chorus only to give some space, I'm gonna sculpt that with filters and EQ and saturation, but leave it on the return. I'm not always rendering, but I always rendering if it's an effect, like a move, like a automated reverse reverb thing. You're committing and you're looking at that, or I want this one word to go and then do a thing. I'm rendering that, cutting it so it ends on the beat I want, but not like if I'm just putting it on the on a vocal.
Jake said something interesting in the chat, and this ties back into what we were talking about earlier. He said, whenever I bring my mix into a room with amazing speakers, what I notice is the deficiencies in the space.
Yes.
And actually, and so that's one of the things that I think it's hard to describe until you've been in different rooms and used fancy speakers in a well-treated, well-set-up room.
Yeah.
There is a thing about, like, are there the, quote-unquote flat monitors might have roughly the right frequencies, but there's a clarity. When you get a certain kind of clarity in your monitoring setup, you start to notice things like that. Notice depth and how frequencies are competing over the course of time in depth of reverb. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that good monitoring or great monitoring is so great.
I can tell the difference between 1.8 seconds and 1.7 seconds. I'm not just putting the reverb time up. I'm listening to the reverb time. And that's good. That's what great monitoring can do. That's the level. Is it necessary to produce a record and within 100 milliseconds of a reverb time? Like, is that really going to make or break the song? No, but that's my job. That's my role as a finisher, to understand that. It's not your role to do that if you're trying to write a pop song. Let's just make a distinction there, put a line in there.
Yeah, I want to say one thing. Somebody asked here, and I don't know if we need to get into this fully as a topic. But Zach asked, how much does sonic quality matter if the songwriting, he said if the songwriting isn't good, and the answer is, there's all the things of that. You can't put you can't. I can't even remember all the phrases, but you can't make something. You can't put a great production on a shitty song and make it a great song. You just never ever can do that.
A good mix can't save a bad song, but a bad mix can ruin a good song.
Yeah. And so I wanted to make maybe a larger point about this topic, which people ask all the time. They're like, well, so-and-so made their thing on the Beats pill, or this guy uses this. And
from start to finish, something was made on a Beats pill.
Yeah. Or they make the beat, or this production, or this mix doesn't sound good, but the song is a hit. All the things one does in production and mixing, or so many of them, are not going to make or break the success of a record, but the accumulation of the taste and the accumulation that happens during the process is incalculable. And if you have somebody who really knows about production to make a bunch of subtle changes, Jon comes in and helps shape some things, all of a sudden, the thing that's already good, that's already clear, you can already hear the vocal, just has some other elements to it. And by the way, you can have, like you said, bad mixes on a great demo, and then all of a sudden the song is kind of ruined because they didn't understand the intent of it. So this process of producing and mixing, there's no hit song where, if the snare drum was a little less brighter or a little brighter, is likely to drastically change the success of that song. But over the course of making a record, you're going to do all of these different little things, and the accumulation of them will add up to something that's, again, incalculable, but clearly important. Because there's times when as a music professional who's done this, who's had hits, who's produced, who's written, who's done all the different things, sometimes I'll hear a song a few times and be like, this isn't that great. And then somebody does a slightly different production. I'm like, fuck, this song is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, there's just...
it's hitting different emotional cues in your body, Like the chord structure could be different in the production, and that's bringing the melody to life, right? It's just like, that's that part. My part is deciding the difference between the size of reverbs and lengths, and someone else is thinking how to harmonically, enhance a vocal performance, right?
What makes that intention, the reason that a mix is so important, or the reason that your taste on a record is so important, is because that intention is, you understand what they're after with the record. You understand the emotional content. You've worked on a lot of different records, a lot of successful records. So you can listen to something and not just go, I'm going to make this sonically better, but go, how do I use my skills of sonic wizardry and sound design to enhance this emotional thing that they're doing? And that's ultimately, it's kind of intangible and incalculable, but it's supremely important. You're using technical skills. And again, getting back to why you need to have the philosophical and emotional approach. Even if you're learning what a compressor does for the first time, understanding the intention throughout the entire process is hugely important.
Sometimes I consider we should change the word mixing to unmixing. Like, sometimes it's about blurring lines between things. Like, some producers just put everything in their place so perfectly, and it just sounds lame. It sounds so sterile. Like there's no glue, for lack of better terms. There's no connection between these parts, just a bunch of overthought parts. And when you loosen things up a little bit, loosen up compression, for example, or nudge things out of time a little bit, it starts feeling more cohesive in a intangible way. You can't necessarily put a finger on it like, oh, that's what he did. But I've had producers, homies of mine, being like, it sounds like you just loosened it up. It's like, yeah, exactly. Like, it just feels like a record now, not a production, and like it's not mixing. I don't know. It's like, I don't even like the word. I'm still trying to figure out what a better word is. I love calling myself a finisher for that reason. Like, I'm not mixing all the time. I'm like, how can I loosen this up? Like, this is tight. Like, why is it so wound up tight? It sounds like it's 50 days were spent on this thing, and all you needed was day one. All I needed were those first 8 elements, and there's 100 elements, and you're like, can I just mute that or just hide them and filter them so they barely exist, but they occupy a certain dense space? Like, that's the unmix for me. But that is mixing.
Somebody, we got such great questions this week, and we're not going to get to all of them, but somebody also asked about, when does production end and songwriting begin? And I like that topic because...
When does songwriting end and production begin?
Or, sorry, production and mixing. Songwriting. Okay. When does production end and mixing begin, or where the line? And the answer is, there's a lot of roles that people do that are both or in between. And like, I would say, your credit on records is mixer, but if you're doing things like nudging a groove so that it opens up, like, that's production. But also, there's people who do production just in the songwriting space because they're creating background vocals and really the arrangement of the song that a cover wouldn't, like if somebody covered a song, it wouldn't have a part of it. But that's such a intentional part of a record that the vocalist who cut the vocal is also doing production. So there's all these overlaps of these roles, and producers are sending their mix to mixers these days. I sent my mix to a mixer a few days ago, and it came back, and it's like a lot of mix decisions I made are in that final record, but I'm not in there being like, I want co-mix credit.
It's not, though. It's not. Like, it is, but it's not. And also, you can ask for that if you want. I think what I wanted to just put a point on is like, the difference is I'm not asking for the production credit because I got the groove. So, but the point, the only difference is know your role. All the roles should be equally important, and we should all be credited accordingly.
Yes.
You know, that's my hold up is people don't want the engineer credit because Spotify doesn't say that they're credited. Apple Music doesn't say that they're credited. Like they're only on title sometimes. So without getting recognized properly, it's hard to want those uncredited roles. But that's what the difference is. When it's done being produced and it's time to mix, when the producer says it's time to mix, if the producer wants co-mix credit or the recording engineer wants co-mix credit because they made decisions, let them have it.
Yeah.
Like, as long as your name is also there as mixer, like, you mixed it.
Yep.
So, like, you know, we talk a lot about the Khalid records and talk. Like, I co-mixed that with Dennis Koziak. Dennis is a brother of mine, and he recorded Khalid and made a lot of mix decisions in there. And then I helped finish it. Like, we're both in integral parts of that process, and we both credited each other accordingly. And this was a conversation that was had, right? That's like... Yeah, Spider, that's the problem with our institutions, exactly. Like where these blurred lines are, I don't care if an engineer wants a co-mix credit. Don't even call it co-mix, just put mixed by and two people. Like who cares? Yeah, it just doesn't make a difference because at the end of the day, like who's cycling through their own credits to determine if they did it or not and validating themselves in that way, that just sounds like a waste of time. You should be on another record. So everyone gets credit for what they did. Don't take a production credit if you're not in the room as a producer because you nudged the groove. Or like I helped change a kick pattern yesterday on this record because the producer trusts me to do that. It's not a production move. He made the call. I did it, but
you executed his production.
It's gray area. I'm not what?
Well, here's the thing I would say.
Produce the record.
You and the Conversations guys. By the way, I'm so excited to listen to the Kian episode. You know, as I've said, Kian's
so good. Oh my God, one of the best.
I'm excited to listen to that interview with Kian.
I'm excited to know him.
Yeah,
cool dude.
Really great guy. But you guys have had conversations about credits and the streaming services, and it's not a topic I know a lot about, and you've covered in other places. The one thing that I want to say to people listening is that what you want is certainly you want to get credit for your work. It's a very important thing. Just generally in life, it's good to get credit. You're never going to get all the credit for all the things you do, and understand that that's okay. And what the flip side of that latter thing is that you want to be the person that people want to trust with their record. So you are going to not get all of your credit when you're starting out or all of your credit later on, but you want the artist and the producer to be like, I need Matt involved. I need Jon involved. I'm just going to call them, even if I don't know exactly what they're going to do. I just trust that they always do whatever it takes to make it great. So the fact that you're making adjustments that some people be like, oh, might be another fee because it's a mix, it's a production thing, whatever. And you're the person that they go, I want him to finish all my records. And if you get a mixer credit and a point and a fee because that's where you're at in your career, like, that's fine. You're going to be good forever on that shit. Now, if you can go in and start writing songs or doing significant things from scratch, that's a whole different conversation. But you want to be known, you, me, we all want to be known as the person that folks want to call when they want shit done. Yeah. And you don't want to be known as someone who's like, yeah, but he does this thing. And then the last time he changed a kick drum and then he asked for additional production credit and it was a pain because we had to go to the other producers. Like, in the long run, you want those long-term relationships with people who go, I need that person to be a part of my record. And look, if somebody's treating you like shit or not paying you and you're doing lots of stuff,
that's different.
Of course. But by and large, I think people overstress about early in their career about getting the perfect credit for things. What you want to do is make great shit over and over and over and have people hire you. Yeah, just be cool. Sum up what I just said. Just be cool.
Cool.
Just be cool.
Let's end on that.
Let's end on that. It's 1:00. So I said to people earlier, I think we're going to launch the Discord today or tomorrow. Hit me up for invites. I got a bunch of people DM'd, and I'm just going to be on Discord on Thursday, figuring it out, not knowing what I'm doing, and talking to folks. And you guys will help build it. So, thank you guys, Jon. Love you.
Love you.
Check out the Conversations with Kian. I'm going to listen to it today.
Sick.
Conversations podcast.
Let me know what you think.
Absolutely. Peace, guys.
Cool. Peace. Bye, Spider.